It's March 1933. A man named Robert sits in the front seat of his truck outside the First National Bank of Detroit. He's been sitting there for 40 minutes. The line isn't moving. Robert is 44 years old. He works at a machine parts factory on the east side of the city. He makes $31 a week. He has never missed a day of work in 11 years. He has $2,200 in that bank. That's 14 months of wages, saved dollar by dollar over a decade. Not invested, not gambled. Saved. The responsible thing. The thing his father told him to do. The thing every institution in his life told him was the right move. He watches a bank employee walk to the front door from the inside. The employee tapes a piece of paper to the glass, turns around, walks away without making eye contact with anyone in line. The paper says 2 words: bank, closed. Robert doesn't move for a long time. He stares at the building. His $2,200 is still inside. He can see the door from where he's sitting. He will never see that money again. Not $1, not 1 cent. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 9,000 American banks closed their doors exactly like this one. Total deposits wiped out exceeded $7 billion. In today's money, that's over $160 billion. Gone. Not lost in the stock market. Not gambled away. Deposited. Trusted. Erased. Robert did nothing wrong. That's the part that doesn't make the history books. The system didn't fail because people were reckless. It failed because the system was designed to work until it didn't. And when it stopped working, the people who paid were the ones who trusted it most. You are not Robert, but your bank account operates on the exact same legal and structural foundation his did, and most people have no idea what that actually means. When you deposit money into a bank, you do not own that money anymore. This is not an opinion. This is contract law. The moment your paycheck hits your checking account, you have entered into a legal agreement with a private corporation. You are lending them your money. In exchange, they hand you a piece of paper that says they owe you, but the cash itself belongs to the bank. They can lend it to a stranger buying a house. They can invest it in government bonds. They can lose it on a bad bet. You are now a creditor. A creditor is someone who is owed money by someone who may not be able to pay. And in a bankruptcy courtroom, unsecured creditors stand at the back of a very long line, behind the bondholders, behind the secured lenders, behind almost everyone else with a claim against the institution. Most people spend their entire lives looking at a number on a bank screen and calling it their money. It isn't their money. It is a promise from a corporation that has every legal right to fail. There's a reason this isn't taught in schools. There's a reason it doesn't come up at the dinner table. The people who benefit from your confusion have a vested interest in keeping it confusing. Here's what that looks like when the promise breaks. In 2023, Silicon Valley Bank collapsed in 48 hours. Not 48 weeks, 48 hours. The bank had taken customer deposits and used them to purchase long-term government bonds. When interest rates rose, those bonds lost value on paper. When depositors found out, they lined up outside branches and tried to withdraw $42 billion in a single day. Tellers at the counter, lines out the door, phones ringing. The bank didn't have the money sitting there. It was locked in bonds that had lost value. 94% of deposits at Silicon Valley Bank exceeded the $250,000 insurance limit. Those depositors were technically unsecured creditors, last in line. The government intervened and made them whole, but that intervention was a choice, not a law, not a guarantee. A discretionary decision made by regulators sitting in a room deciding whether the political cost of not acting was too high. Next time, they might decide differently, and there will be a next time. The FDIC Insurance Fund holds approximately $116 billion in a reserve account. Total insured deposits in the U.S. banking system exceed $10 trillion. That means for every $100 the fund is supposed to protect, it has $1.16 sitting in reserve. $1.16. The fund is not designed to survive a systemic crisis. It is designed to handle one bank failing at a time while everyone else stays calm. Robert trusted the appearance of safety. So do you, and the gap between appearance and reality has a specific dollar amount attached to it. Here's what fractional reserve banking actually looks like in a room you can picture. Imagine you walk into a bank and hand a teller $1,000 in cash. The teller puts $100 in the drawer, then hands $900 of your money to the person standing behind you in line. That person is a stranger taking out a loan. They walk out the door with $900 of what used to be your money. They deposit that $900 into a different bank across town. That bank keeps $90 and hands $810 to the next stranger taking out a loan. The cycle continues until your original $1,000 has generated $9,000 in loans spread across the entire banking system. This is not a conspiracy theory. This is called the money multiplier, and it is taught in every economics textbook in the country. It works under one specific condition. Everyone has to trust the system at the same time. Nobody can want all their money back at once, because the money was never all there. It was never supposed to be all there. The entire system is built on the assumption that on any given day, most people will leave their money sitting in the bank untouched. In 1930, that assumption broke. A single large bank in New York closed its doors in December of that year. The news spread by telephone and by word of mouth to small towns across the Midwest and the South. Farmers standing in feed stores heard it. Factory workers heard it at lunch. Wives heard it from neighbors across the fence. And one by one, people walked to their local bank and stood in line. Not because they knew something specific, because their neighbor was in line, because the line outside looked longer than it did last Tuesday. Each person who withdrew made the next person more likely to withdraw. Each bank that failed made depositors at the next bank more nervous. Between 1930 and 1933, more than 9,000 banks closed. 1/3 of all the money Americans thought they owned vanished. Not invested, not speculated, thought they owned. The Federal Reserve existed during this period. It had the tools to act. Men in suits sat in a room in Washington and chose not to use them. Some historians argue those men actually made conditions worse while people like Robert sat outside locked banks in the cold. The people running the system made decisions that accelerated the collapse, and the people who paid were the ones standing in line. As of mid-2023, American banks were sitting on more than $500 billion in paper losses on bonds they purchased when interest rates were low. The bonds are still on the balance sheets. The losses are still there, locked inside buildings with marble floors in professional logos and people in suits behind glass. The same trap Robert walked into, just with better branding. And if you think the insurance exists to protect you from that trap, you need to hear what the fund actually contains. There is no perfect answer to this question. Anyone who tells you there is selling something. What follows is not financial advice. It is a description of the options that existed in 1929, the options that exist now, and what history shows about each one. You decide what to do with it. Option 1. Physical cash held outside the banking system. Paper currency kept in your home, in a safe, in a location you control. It cannot be frozen. It cannot be locked behind a closed door with a handwritten sign taped to the glass. It cannot be converted into bank equity while you sleep. During the Great Depression, people who held physical cash outside the banking system were in a better position than those who didn't. Prices fell during the 1930s. Deflation made every dollar worth more than it was the day before. Cash was the strongest asset in the room. But physical cash has a specific weakness. Inflation destroys it silently. If prices rise 7% a year, a stack of cash sitting in a home safe loses 7% of its purchasing power every 12 months. You don't see it happening. The bills look the same, the number doesn't change, but what those bills can buy shrinks every single day. In the Weimar Republic in 1923, Germans were burning paper currency in their fireplaces for heat, not because they were angry, because the wood cost more than the bills.
So the question with physical cash is not whether to hold some. The question is whether the crisis coming looks more like 1932 or 1923, because the same decision that saved one man destroyed another. And the next option feels safer than cash until you read the fine print. Option 2, United States Treasury securities purchased directly from the government. When you buy a Treasury bill or Treasury bond, you are lending money to the federal government, not a private bank, not a corporation, the federal government. These can be purchased directly through a government website called Treasury Direct. No bank holding your money as an intermediary, no private institutions standing between you and your asset.
The U.S. government has never defaulted on its debt in the history of the country. Treasuries are the collateral that the entire global financial system runs on. In a banking crisis, investors historically move money into treasuries because they are considered the safest dollar-denominated asset available. But there is a catch. If you hold treasuries through a brokerage account, you are relying on that brokerage to remain solvent. If the brokerage fails, your assets should be protected under a separate insurance program, but the process can take weeks, and during those weeks, you have no access. If you hold treasuries directly through Treasury Direct, you eliminate that middleman entirely, but selling becomes harder, and in a fast-moving crisis, slow is the same as locked. The next option has existed for 5,000 years and has been confiscated by governments at least once in living memory. Option 3, physical gold and silver held outside the banking system. Gold has functioned as a store of value for thousands of years across dozens of civilizations. It cannot be printed, it cannot be defaulted on. It exists outside the banking system entirely. A gold coin sitting in a safe at your home is not a promise from a corporation. It is a physical object with no counterparty attached to it. During the 1930s, gold held its value while paper assets collapsed around it. But here is the historical fact most people skip over. In 1933, President Franklin Roosevelt signed Executive Order 6102. That order made it illegal for American citizens to own gold bullion. Citizens were required to hand their gold to the Federal Reserve in exchange for paper dollars at a fixed price of $20.67 per ounce. The government then immediately revalued gold to $35 per ounce. This is not a theory, this is documented law. Look up Executive Order 6102. The government confiscated privately held gold from its own citizens during a financial crisis. It can do so again. Any president can sign an executive order. Silver carries similar properties to gold, but moves more violently in price. If you choose physical metals, you must also solve the storage problem yourself. A safe deposit box inside a bank is still inside the banking system. During bank holidays, safe deposit boxes are often inaccessible. The metal is yours, but you cannot reach it. The government changed the rules once during a crisis. There is no law preventing them from doing it again. The last option cannot be confiscated because it cannot be moved. Option 4. Real assets. Land, a house, equipment that produces something. Physical things that exist in the world and cannot be converted into bank equity by a regulator sitting in a room. In inflationary environments, real assets have historically outperformed financial assets. A piece of land does not lose purchasing power when the government prints money, but real assets are not liquid. You cannot pay rent with a half acre of land. You cannot buy groceries with a tractor. In a deflationary collapse, real asset prices often fall sharply because buyers disappear and credit dries up. The farmer who owned land in 1931 still owned the land, but nobody could afford to buy it from him. Every option has a condition under which it fails. The people who came through intact weren't the ones who found the perfect option. They were the ones who never put everything behind one door. Here is the uncomfortable truth that ties all 4 options together. The system is designed to keep your money inside the system. Tax advantages flow to bank accounts and brokerage accounts. Convenience flows to digital transactions and automatic deposits. Social norms treat physical cash as suspicious and gold as eccentric, and foreign accounts as something only criminals hold. Every friction point is designed to keep your assets inside institutions that hold them as liabilities on a balance sheet. This is not an accident, it is architecture. If you want to build alongside the system instead of being extracted by it, I use Webull for the portion of my portfolio that stays in the market. Free trades, no account minimums, and they'll give you free stocks just for opening an account. Link is in the description. Which of these 4 options are you already using? Drop the number in the comments, 1, 2, 3, or 4. This channel exists to show you the mechanics before you need them. If that matters to you, subscribe. New video every week. Robert sat outside that bank in Detroit in 1933 for a long time. He eventually drove home. He told his wife. She didn't say anything for a while. Then she asked how they were going to buy food. Robert's $2,200 was still inside that building. He could see the door from where he was parked. He never saw that money again. Not $1, not 1 cent. He went back to work the next Monday. He worked the same job for another 11 years. He never fully recovered. Not because he was reckless, not because he gambled, because he trusted a system that was designed to work until it didn't. And when it stopped working, the people who paid were the ones who trusted it most. You are not Robert, but your money is sitting in the same kind of building, behind the same kind of door, held by the same kind of promise. The question is whether you understand what that promise is actually worth. If you enjoyed the video, YouTube thinks you'll really like this next one too.